After eons of conflict, the creeping darkness that threatened the balance of existence was driven back to its own realm, a seal placed before them in the form of the Constant. Little was it expected that advanced creatures would evolve upon the forsaken oasis, and unwittingly release the eldritch nightmares once more. Now with tentative control over the Constant, the shadow creatures plot to unleash their brethren, and finally consume the transcendental beings of light that had thwarted them so long ago. Gods had begun. Humanity had all players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly Now that the darkness had spread across the Constant, the land was unstable, turning to ash wherever the shadows touched. They had the power to reverse the damage, but not the will. Their entire purpose was to consume and turn everything to shadow, and if they were ever going to reopen the gateway, then they would need someone to channel their power through and stabilize the Constant. Beginning their search for another to sit upon their throne of nightmares, the shadow creatures managed to disperse a portion of their power through dimensional cracks into nearby realities, manifesting itself in a variety of ways across the Omniverse, but in the realm of Earth, it took the form of a book known as the Codex Umbra. The book would eventually fall into the hands of a William Carter, who studied the tomes and used the cursed knowledge it contained to transform himself into the magician Maxwell. Upon overusing the book in his performances, Maxwell and his assistant Charlie were pulled into the Constant, where they found vast plains of ash, containing only ruins, a spattering of strange creatures, and the shadows. He had already accepted the power of the shadows when he utilized it in his old life, so he alone was placed upon the throne and commanded that he reform and maintain the world so another may enter and open the gateway. Without any choice in his actions, and believing Charlie had been killed, Maxwell did as he was commanded and rebuilt the Constant as he had envisioned. Knowing the activation of this gateway could only hold disaster, he made the land terrifying and dangerous, so much so that no one could possibly survive it for any length of time. He also managed to fracture the realm, making it so that it was impossible for the survivors he would eventually bring here to team up. His efforts were cruel and would lead to torturous existences for everyone he was forced to abduct, but ultimately it would be for the greater good. Maxwell would remain tied to the Nightmare Throne for what seemed like an eternity, not believing anyone he tricked into the Constant would be so kind as to free him, and yet he was eventually granted his freedom by one of the survivors. It was a bittersweet moment though, for upon being released, Maxwell crumbled to bones, only to be reborn as a survivor himself, while his saviour was forced to replace him, the shadow creatures always needing the throne to be inhabited in order to maintain the Constant. While time is not exactly a clear aspect in the Constant, in the scheme of events, Maxwell's saviour would not need to sit upon the throne for long, as others would find them and usurp the throne for themselves, each time perpetuating a cycle of freedom and enslavement that would only end when an unlikely individual voluntarily chose to take the throne for themselves. While Maxwell did not know what had truly happened to his assistant, and believed her to be dead, her true fate may have been much worse. When Maxwell was placed upon the Nightmare Throne, Charlie was taken and experimented on by the shadow creatures. They knew Maxwell may act to hinder their plans, and so took the opportunity to prepare a replacement for him in the form of a mortal merged with a shadow creature. This would mean they no longer needed to relay commands through an independent mind, and could simply change the world as they pleased. There was no guarantee the experiments would work though, and in the end Charlie was left with two feuding personalities within her body, that of her original self and the shadow creature that had infested her. It was not until she made her move to take the Nightmare Throne that the dual personalities reconciled, and the shadow creature's experiment proved to be a success. So much of a success was it that Charlie was able to project herself into every corner of the Constant, lurking in the shadows and able to harm anyone who ventured into the darkness. Soon after Charlie declared herself Queen of the Constant, Maxwell found that he was occupying the same realm as Winston, one of the first survivors he had pulled into the Constant, and after coming to terms with the fact they would need to work together in order to survive, they decided to construct a jerry-rigged portal so that they may unite with other survivors on their own terms, rather than that of the shadow creatures. But Charlie had been watching, and destroyed the portal, replacing it with her own Florid postern. Now having made a way for the survivors to work together, Charlie compelled them to seek out the ruins of the ancient civilization that had wrought so much calamity, and reactivate their broken gateway so the nightmares could once more spill forth unhindered. She promised that the gateway could lead them a great many places, including back to Earthrealm. So without any other options, the survivors uncovered the gateway deep beneath the surface and activated it. While the portal did indeed take them to other places, none took them home, and all the time more and more shadow entities crossed over, amassing a force large enough to face the lunar beings. Seeing the gateway active again and the growing threat below, the Watchers on the moon decided they must take action and broke away part of their celestial construct, throwing it to the constant as a staging ground for what was to come. Here on this lunar island, they would gather their strength and attempted to enlighten any of the survivors who ventured there to the true nature of things. While they were not yet able to fully comprehend the truth, the enlightened entities were confident they would eventually be able to, and at that time they would venture forth into the ruins one last time, pushing back the darkness as they went, and reseal the gateway once and for all. Where their first conflict had once raged in the abstract voids of an unknowable reality, their final one would take place in the constant itself, with lowly mortals from another existence leading the charge. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, then please consider liking the video, subscribing and sharing it with your friends. If you want to support the channel even more, then head over to Patreon, become a channel member or buy some merch. Links are all down in the description. I hope you all have a great day and I'll see you next time.